Forget the dusty encyclopedias for a second.
Yeah, definitely.
And, forget the serene paintings of quiet hillsides and polite moral platitudes. The historical document we are unpacking today reads less like a gentle sermon and, well, entirely like a script for a tense, high-stakes political thriller.
It really does.
We are opening up Matthew chapter 26, and suddenly you are thrust into a world of backroom deals, illegal late-night trials, and just profound, devastating psychological betrayal.
Accent text.
Welcome to today's deep dive, where our mission is to unpack a single, highly charged text that drops you right into the middle of a political powder keg.
Yeah, and it is genuinely one of the most volatile historical narratives you can study. To give you a sense of the scope, this text covers the crucial, frantic hours leading right up to the Passion of Christ.
Right.
We are tracking a sequence that starts with an anointing in Bethany, moves to the establishment of a new covenant at a hidden Last Supper, and culminates in a midnight tactical arrest in an olive grove.
Wow.
But the key to unlocking this entire narrative is realizing that absolutely none of this happens in a vacuum.
No, it is the exact opposite of a vacuum. To truly grasp why the events in this document escalate so quickly, I want you to imagine stepping into a city that is practically vibrating with tension. Imagine you are walking down narrow, ancient streets where the ruling class is just there sweating bullets.
Oh, absolutely terrified.
Right, because they know that one wrong move, one single spark could ignite a massive, brutal military crackdown that would end their way of life. We were in Judea around AD 30 to 33, and it is the Feast of the Passover and unleavened bread.
And if you look at the historical record, Passover was unequivocally the most dangerous time of the year for the authorities in first-century Jerusalem.
Yeah.
To understand the sheer anxiety of the leaders, you have to look at what Passover actually means. I mean, this isn't just a quiet religious observance.
No, not at all.
It is the annual festival celebrating the ancient Israelites' liberation from Egyptian slavery.
So it is deeply inherently nationalistic. I mean, it's a holiday that literally celebrates overthrowing an empire and gaining freedom.
And that is the crux of the problem right there. You have a holiday intrinsically tied to the idea of an oppressed people being freed, and it is being celebrated by hundreds of thousands of pilgrims who have just flooded into Jerusalem.
Massive crap.
Massive. But these pilgrims are currently living under the thumb of a very different, very real empire, which is Rome.
Right.
Because of the extreme risk of a Jewish rebellion during this specific festival, the Roman military didn't just sit back. They heavily reinforced security.
They brought in the big guns.
They brought in extra garrisons, yeah. The troops would literally stand on the colonnades of the Antonia fortress, looking down directly into the temple courts, heavily armed and on extremely high alert.
That paints an incredible picture. It makes me think of a modern-day host city for a massive politically charged protest, but it's mixed with a major national holiday.
That's a great way to put it.
You have millions of people pouring into the streets, emotions are running incredibly high, the rhetoric is all about liberation, and the entire time, the city is heavily militarized by an occupying foreign army just waiting for a single rock to be thrown so they can drop the hammer.
That captures the sheer claustrophobia of the environment perfectly. I want you to consider the sensory overload of that setting.
Yeah.
The streets are packed shoulder to shoulder. The air is thick with the smoke of sacrifices and the very real threat of violence. Everyone is watching everyone else.
Total paranoia.
Exactly. The Roman guards are gripping their weapons a little tighter with every passing hour. And the local Jewish religious and political leaders are utterly terrified that this massive crowd is going to get out of hand.
Which naturally pushes the real story behind closed doors. With 1 million pilgrims packing those streets and Roman swords literally glinting from the fortress above, the local leaders aren't just nervous, they're facing an existential threat.
Right.
So we leave the noisy, packed streets and move into the quiet, paranoid halls of power.
Specifically, we move to the palace of the High Priest Caiaphas. Here, the text shows the Sanhedrin, which is the Jewish religious ruling body, engaged in some desperate, closed-door plotting.
Okay.
And to understand their panic, we have to look at the deep divide in Jewish leadership at this time. Traditionally, according to Jewish law, the high priesthood was supposed to be a lifetime appointment. It was a sacred duty, completely independent of foreign politics.
But under Roman occupation, I'm guessing that independence was completely stripped away.
It was entirely compromised. High priests were appointed and deposed at the whim of the Roman authorities.
Wow.
Caiaphas, however, managed to hold on to his power from AD 18 all the way to 36.
That's a long time.
It is an unusually long tenure for that era. And he didn't survive that long by being a pure spiritual leader. He managed it by being a shrewd political operator who worked very closely with the Roman prefect, Pontius Pilate.
So he's essentially playing a massive game of political compromise. Traditional purists in the city must have deeply resented leaders like him, seeing them as puppets for the occupying force.
They absolutely did.
Yeah.
But Caiaphas represented the Sadducean elites,
Yeah.
the aristocratic class, and their primary goal was temple stability.
Got it.
We have to look at the mechanics of their power. The temple wasn't just a church, it was the economic engine of Judea.
Right. The money.
Exactly. The Sadducees controlled the treasury, the commerce, the massive influx of pilgrim wealth. They wanted to appease their Roman overlords at all costs to maintain that incredibly lucrative status quo. And in that volatile, high-stakes environment, Jesus of Nazareth was viewed as a severe, immediate political liability.
Because of his massive popularity, he's drawing huge crowds of these exact Passover pilgrims who are already hyped up on liberation theology.
Exactly that.
Yeah.
If his immense popularity sparked a populist riot, even an accidental one where things just got a little too loud, Rome wouldn't hesitate. They wouldn't ask questions.
They just wipe them out.
They would intervene with brutal, overwhelming military force to crush the uprising.
Yeah.
And in the aftermath, the Sadducees would instantly lose their power, their aristocratic positions, and their total monopoly over the temple economy.
So it's all on the line.
This desperate plotting by the Sanhedrin wasn't a theological debate. It was about pure, unadulterated political survival.
Okay, I want to jump in here because there is a massive logistical problem with their plan, and it's something the text itself points out.
Yeah.
The narrative explicitly notes that these elites decided they could not arrest Jesus during the feast because they were terrified of a populist uprising.
Right.
They knew the crowds loved him, and a public arrest would trigger the exact riot they were trying to prevent. So if they were so terrified of the crowds that they literally hit pause on their entire plot, how on earth did the arrest actually happen during the festival? What blew up their timeline?
That logistical nightmare is the pivot point of the entire chapter.
Okay.
You have a target who is wildly popular, surrounded by thousands of supporters in a walled city. You cannot touch him in daylight.
No way.
You have to know exactly where he is going to be when the crowds are gone in the dead of night.
Mm-hmm.
And that kind of actionable intelligence is suddenly, unexpectedly handed to them through a shocking internal breach.
Enter Judas Iscariot.
Exactly. The text focuses in on Matthew 26, verses 14 and 15. Then one of the 12, whose name was Judas Iscariot, went to the chief priests and said, "What will you give me if I deliver him over to you?" And they paid him 30 pieces of silver.
It's the ultimate inside job. It really plays out like an heist movie.
It does.
The ruling class couldn't breach the perimeter of Jesus' popularity. The crowd was an impenetrable wall of support, so they bought the loyalty of his security detail.
Yep.
They found the one guy on the inside willing to give them the secret access, the exact GPS coordinates, so to speak, to bypass the protective crowds entirely.
And if we dig into the psychology behind Judas's decision, it is incredibly revealing about the political climate. I mean, why sunny pieces of silver? Why turn on a leader you followed for years?
That's a huge question.
Historical context suggests a compelling motive rooted in shattered expectations.
Yeah.
You have to remember the zealot mindset of first-century Judea. Many people were expecting a messianic figure who would be a literal militaristic warlord.
Like a conqueror.
Yes. They wanted a new King David with a sword, someone to violently slaughter the Roman garrisons and take the city back by force.
But instead, they have a leader who, right at the beginning of this very chapter in verse 2, is openly predicting his own crucifixion.
Exactly.
He says, "You know that after 2 days the Passover is coming, and the Son of Man will be delivered up to be crucified." He's basically telling his inner circle, we're not building an earthly army, I am going to die.
Right. Imagine you are Judas. You have invested years of your life into what you thought was a violent political revolution, and suddenly your leader is talking about submitting to execution.
It completely shatters your worldview.
It does. Judas likely saw this as a failed project and wanted an out, perhaps trying to force Jesus' hand, or simply cashing out before the Romans rounded them all up.
Makes sense politically.
But regardless of the political calculation, I want to emphasize the profound tragedy of the text here. Have you ever had a moment where you realized someone fundamentally, entirely misunderstood your mission and who you were?
Oh, yeah. That hurts.
This isn't just a cold business transaction for 30 pieces of silver. It is a deeply personal, devastating, relational betrayal.
And it's that secret transaction that sets off a massive chain reaction, leading directly to what I think is the most extreme contrast in the entire narrative.
Oh, for sure.
We move from the noise of the city and the plotting of the priests straight into the eerie, isolated quiet of the olive grove or the Garden of Gethsemane.
The tonal shift is jarring. In Gethsemane, the text strips away all the political noise and shows us Jesus in a state of agonizing, solitary submission.
Yeah.
The narrative quotes Matthew 26:39, where he falls on his face and prays, "My Father, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. Nevertheless, not as I will, but as you will."
I struggle with this garden scene, to be honest.
How so?
Well, if Jesus knew Judas had flipped and he knew exactly what was coming, why not just leave? Why stay in that isolated garden and wait for the tactical team to arrive? It feels like he is deliberately letting the trap snap shut on himself.
He is. And that goes to the core theological and psychological resolve of the text. He isn't the victim of circumstance here. He is willingly submitting to the cup of suffering.
Ah, okay.
He is choosing not to trigger the violent uprising his followers might have wanted. And the tragedy is amplified by what is happening just a few feet away.
Right, the disciples.
While he is in this state of absolute agony, his disciples, his closest friends, keep falling asleep. They are completely oblivious to the gravity of the moment. They can't even stay awake with him in his darkest hour.
And then that quiet vulnerability is violently shattered. You can almost hear the crunch of footsteps and the clanking of Roman and temple guard armor coming through the olive trees.
It's a terrifying image.
Judas arrives, leading a heavily armed crowd, and he betrays Jesus with a kiss. He takes a universal symbol of deep affection and twists it into a tactical marker for an arrest team. Jesus is seized and immediately dragged out of the garden before the Sanhedrin.
Which brings us to the trial. And the specific language the narrative uses to describe this proceeding is crucial.
Yeah, the text calls it an illegal late-night trial. Could we unpack the sheer desperation of that? I mean, a supreme legal body holding a rushed kangaroo court in the middle of the night at someone's house.
It's wild.
That screams that this was entirely about maintaining power and absolutely nothing to do with actual justice.
The timeline tells you everything you need to know about the mechanism of their fear. We discussed their terror of the Passover crowds. That fear dictated every single second of this midnight operation.
Because of the pilgrims.
Exactly. They couldn't do this in the daylight. They couldn't risk a public trial where Jesus' massive base of supporters could rally and start a riot. They had to get it done in the shadows while the entire city slept.
So they just railroad him.
They pushed through false witnesses and suspend the rule of law. They needed the execution orders signed so that by the time the crowds woke up the next morning, it was already a done deal. Political expediency entirely overwrote the justice system.
It's an incredibly dark sequence of events. You have these corrupt elites successfully pulling off their Black Ops rendition. But what really strikes me as I process this whole narrative is that the true heartbreak of the chapter isn't actually about Caiaphas or the Sanhedrin winning.
No. It goes much deeper than the political plotting. The ultimate tragedy of this text is the sudden, catastrophic collapse of his inner circle. The systemic power doesn't just crush Jesus, it shatters his closest friends.
Her text notes that as soon as the armed crowd arrives in the garden, the disciples, the men who had followed him for years, just flee into the night. They completely abandon him. And the human drama really peaks with Peter.
Peter, the disciple famously known as the Rock, the one who swore he would die before abandoning his leader.
And the devastating irony here is that Jesus explicitly warned them this was coming. Back in verse 31, he prophesied, "You will all fall away because of me this night."
Yeah, he knew.
He told Peter directly that he would deny him. Yet, when the moment actually arrives, Peter is completely, fundamentally unprepared. It makes me think of someone who talks a massive game about standing up to a corrupt boss.
Oh, that's a good comparison.
You know? They boast to their coworkers about how they are going to walk into the office and demand justice. But the second they are actually pulled into the boardroom, surrounded by the CEO, the executives, and the corporate lawyers, their throat just closes up. The sheer suffocating weight of institutional power completely crushes their individual bravado.
That is the exact mechanism of systemic fear at play here. I want you to really consider what it feels like to be in Peter's shoes in that high priest's courtyard.
It must have been terrifying.
It is so easy for us to judge him from the safety of history. But this text masterfully shows how easily loyalty and courage disintegrates when faced with absolute, terrifying authority. Peter isn't facing a hypothetical threat or a schoolyard bully. He is standing alone, in the dark, in the courtyard of the most powerful man in the city. Men who just successfully orchestrated an armed, illegal midnight rendition of his best friend. If they can do that to Jesus, what could they do to a fisherman from Galilee?
The psychological pressure must have been utterly suffocating.
And under that pressure, he breaks. The narrative highlights Matthew 26, verses 74 and 75. When a servant girl accuses him of knowing Jesus, Peter doesn't just politely deny it. He panics.
He completely loses it.
He begins to invoke a curse on himself and swears, "I do not know the man." He uses the strongest language possible to distance himself from the movement, and immediately after those words leave his mouth, the rooster crows.
And Peter remembered the saying of Jesus. Wow.
He remembers the prophecy. The adrenaline fades. The reality of what he just did sets in, and the chapter ends with him going out and weeping bitterly. It is a profound, devastating portrait of a man realizing that his own internal conviction was absolutely no match for his very human fear of the ruling class.
So what does this all mean for us today? We started by talking about a massive, volatile powder keg of a city, about political survival, maintaining economic monopolies, and ruthless backroom deals, and we end with a single man weeping in the dark because the sheer weight of that systemic power just broke him.
It leaves you with a tremendous amount to process regarding human nature and political power. But as we look back at the entirety of this historical narrative, this intricate web of political maneuvering, betrayal, and fear, it raises a deeply provocative question.
Okay, let's hear it.
Consider the ultimate driving goal of Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin. Their entire motivation was to prevent a massive populist uprising.
Right.
They wanted to maintain their political stability, protect their wealth, and appease the Roman Empire by executing this one man in secret, extinguishing his movement before it could catch fire in the streets.
That was the plan.
But looking at the broader, sprawling scope of history, isn't it the ultimate irony that this exact act, this desperate, ruthless play for political survival, religious revolution in human history, a movement that ultimately outlasted the entire Roman Empire itself?
Okay, we need to hear from you on this one. Step into that first-century powder keg for a second and drop a comment below with your thoughts on today's historical drama. Think about how you would react. Would you have cracked under the suffocating pressure like Peter did when the authorities closed in? Or do you think you would have seen right through the Sanhedrin's political games from the start? Let us know down in the comments. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive into the intense political tensions and the absolute drama of the past, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss out on our historical deep dives. Also, don't forget to check the description below for exclusive links related to the amazing sources we unpacked today. We're leaving the tension of that powder keg behind for now, but get ready because the next episode will be even more intense.